Hello, my name's Sean McDonald. I'll be your moderator for the next 45 odd minutes. Welcome to our webinar today, which is all about setting your strategic board agenda. Firstly, thanks for attending. We appreciate the effort you've made to be here today. And during our session, if you have any questions, please use the Q&A button at the bottom of your screen. We will be answering as many of these as we have time for. And finally, if you stay through till the end, which we hope you do, and as usual for our webinars, we have a special treat for you. By answering a 1-minute survey at the end, you'll go in the draw to win a beautiful gift hamper from our friends at Taken Care Of, worth over $400. And finally, there will be a bonus offer at the end of the webinar, where you'll be able to receive a really comprehensive strategic board agenda template that's been compiled by Steve Bowman. After many years of work in organizations around the world, this document is valued at around $4,500 and will be available to you free of charge for webinar attendees only. So stay around at the end for that particular offer. For those of you who don't know BoardPro, we're a board software provider that serve around 17,000 users around the globe. And we enable organizations to run their board meetings more effectively with clever software, with less time, and deliver more impact and value for their organization. And as much as we're a software provider, a board software provider, part of our wider mission, which Brett will talk to in just a moment, is to make the fundamentals of governance free and easy to implement for all organizations, especially those with resource constraints. So today, let me introduce our host and panelists for today's webinar, starting with Stephen Bowman. Stephen is Managing Director of Conscious Governance and brings a depth of experience with board reviews and strategic planning. Steve has a wealth of executive and governance experience and has written over 14 books on governance and strategy. Good day to you, Stephen.
Hello, everyone. Welcome.
Giselle McLaughlin is a governance specialist with an eye on the strategic horizon as well as on the ground just ahead. Giselle is all about down-to-earth governance and business advice and thrives on building sustainable businesses alongside healthy leaders and lives. Kia ora, Giselle.
Kia ora, Sean. Hei mihi mahana, kia koutou. So a warm welcome to everybody.
And finally, Brett Hurt is the co-founder and CEO here at BoardPro. Brett is a serial entrepreneur, having built several high-growth businesses over the last 20-odd years. Brett brings tenacity, a strategic mindset, strong generalist business skills, and an enduring curiosity to the table. Kia ora to you, Brett.
Kia ora and welcome, everyone.
Now, Brett, we've had, over the last month or two, we've had so many requests for this particular part of the presentation. I thought you might want to take a few minutes just to talk about the 3x5 Governance Playbook, which centered around a lot of the webinars we had previously.
Yeah, sure. So what we've, so BoardPro's technology company at heart, providing board management software. But what we noticed over the years is so many of our target market, those SMBs and not-for-profits are sort of in their governance maturity journey, and we got a lot of questions about not only how to use the product, but how to do governance. So fundamentally, to serve the market, we really decided to see if we could codify and simplify the real fundamentals of governance and provide that content free to the market. So that's essentially what the 3x5 Governance Playbook is. And you see there that it's centered around what we see as the 5 primary processes every board should run, the 5 primary inputs and outputs. So that's kind of the overview. And the series of webinars, many of them are sort of, fleshing out aspects of, what we'd also call minimum viable governance.
Thanks, Brett. And you can actually find out all about that particular playbook on our blog, which is available at boardprohub.com/blog. Okay, so for the next 40 or so minutes, just relax, listen and add to the discussion by asking as many questions as you would like. The full recording of this webinar, along with the slide deck and the white paper, will be sent to you at the conclusion of today's session. Now, before we start, I have a few poll questions that I'd like to post out, and this will enable the team to get a good feel for our audience today. So let me just release 1 or 2 of those.
I'm just trying to vote and I've just been told I can't.
No, you have to take it in, Giselle.
Yeah.
So fairly even. Oh, the two middle ones, yes, mostly and occasionally account for 80 odd, 75 odd %.
Very good. Let me just select another one. Okay. Thank you, everybody.
Oh, it disappeared. Okay.
All right, Stephen, the floor is yours, so to speak. So over to you.
Why, thank you. Okay, so today we're talking about structuring your board agenda. Now, most people, when they think of a board agenda, they go, oh God, it's the same thing each board meeting anyway. But it is the single biggest tool that you've got to help keep your directors focused on what they need to keep focused on. So, you know, I was reading the poll before, you know, how often do you change your strategy? Well, it probably should be every board meeting. And the reason for that is that if things are changing, we need to be on top of them every time we meet. We need to be aware of them. And we'll show you techniques to actually make sure that your board is fulfilling its purpose. The purpose of any board is not to meet. The purpose of any board is to make the choices that create the future for the communities that we serve. And we need to structure our board meetings to help the choices become very obvious. The creating of the future is at front of mind, and always looking at who are these communities that we're serving, which are the ones that we're not, where are the ones that we haven't had a chance to find out more information about. So to make the choices that create the future for the communities we serve is the purpose of the board, and everything else is a tool to help get us there. And the agenda is one of the key tools to help us keep focused. Now, one of the things that we found is that the key element that makes boards either micromanage or go off into rabbit holes of very interesting projects but spend no time creating the future is how board reports are actually presented to the board, and the conversation and the sequence of conversations that the board needs to actually put in place. So let's talk about the agenda from that space. The first thing for people to get is really the chair owns the agenda. The chair owns a sequence of events. The board doesn't own the agenda. So this is controversial point number one. Directors do not own the agenda. The chair of the board does. And this is shown to be at law. Now, a good chair taps into their directors to find out if there's other elements that need discussing, other elements that need investigating. But in the end, the chair has the legal ownership of the agenda. Now, who writes it? Well, typically the CEO. Go back one, Sean. Who writes it? The CEO, the company secretary. Sometimes there's professional company board minute takers, but it should always go to the chair because the chair owns it, and the chair can make any adaptations if they need to.
Can I just chip in here, Stephen?
Of course.
I think it's a really, really interesting point. It comes up a lot in practice. People say, well, my chair never asks me. The first thing I hear about the agenda is when I get it in the board pack. Well, actually, that's on you as well. So obviously, as you've said, a good chair will ask, but my flip to that would be a good director will offer.
Correct.
Engage with the chair well in advance and say, look, I really think we need to spend more time here, or I'd like us to talk about this topic. The chair doesn't, of course, have to agree.
Yep.
But it would be kind of interesting if they didn't.
Yeah, so I think the key, there's some tools and techniques. We can get into some of these tools and techniques now. Leave the slide where it is, Sean. One of the tools is that you can actually ask your directors to touch base with you as chair or chair and CEO 2 days before the board meeting, so that you can allocate a half hour where the directors can call in and do one of two things. They can either ask for clarification on any of the papers that have been sent out as part of the board pack or the sequence of events on the agenda. So they can ask for clarification there, or they can petition the chair to add something else onto the agenda that they think is strategically important. But this shouldn't happen at the board meeting. It should happen prior to the board meeting. And that, as Giselle said, is on each of us as directors to take an active interest in what is on the agenda and support to the chair if anything strategically important is worthy of the board's time. Giselle, your thoughts?
Yeah, so look, I'm half attracted by Laurie's question. We'll have a look at that in a minute, but I think it's a really interesting suggestion. So we have a convention in governance that you let the chair know about any questions you have in advance. You know, that's just good manners. But what you're doing with that 30-minute, 2 days ahead appointment, which people can choose to join or not, is you're pushing them to be ready 2 days in advance. I think it's a really interesting opportunity for the chair to drive high performance and to drive preparation.
Yeah.
And no one can leave it to the last minute then, because it's obvious that they've done that. I'm pretty intrigued.
So the key thing in there is the chair owns the sequence. Now, if the chair's not good at this, we need to help the chair. As a director, we need to step up and actually help the chair to hold their hand if required, to support them, to do whatever it is. If you read the white paper at some stage, you'll see a little bit that I put in there. And if the chair just is not capable of doing this, then you probably need to invite them to move on from their role as chair, because this is such a critical component of making sure the board is focusing on what it needs to focus on. Okay, next one, Sean.
I'll just quickly fill in with Laurie's sharing of her experience as a CEO, I presume. It says the day that the chair opened their courier pack and the days before electronic papers as they began the meeting. Well, there's a lack of commitment from the chair. So yeah, sorry that you experienced that, Laurie, and not an easy situation.
We used to call that the white paper envelope ripping syndrome, where the first sound you heard was the white paper envelope being ripped open as they sat down at the board table. Okay, so here are some hints to really start focusing on how we put our agenda together. The first one is, please put your vision statement or your purpose statement at the top of the agenda, because the reason for the board to meet is not to meet. The reason for the board to meet is to bring to life the creation of the vision. That's why we exist. We're not there to receive reports on how busy staff are. We are there to have conversations about how we're going about creating this potential future, this promise that our organisation is. So having the vision at the top means that as the chair or as a director, you can use it to help shape conversations that are going down rabbit holes, help shape those conversations that are getting a bit murky. Always use your vision as a touch point to bring people back to, well, this conversation we're having, can we look at it through the filter of these two elements in our vision statement? It really helps guides behaviour. So vision at the top of all your agendas. The second key element that we've found works really well is to have a cover sheet, a photograph of a key piece of work that you're doing, or some organisations call it a mission moment. Here's an example, a short story of what's happened in the last since the last board meeting that illustrates the difference that's being created out there. Explore what it is to remind directors why we're sitting there. Some organisations, faith-based organisations, do this quite well. They often start an agenda off with a short prayer, and then that prayer is related back to their strategic plan, or that prayer is related back to one of their key risks. Keep people connected of why we're there in the first place. Giselle?
So a really important point here. It's something I don't know what happens in Australia. I'm sorry, Stephen, but here in New Zealand, more and more board meetings are being opened with a formal kata care, which is a Māori prayer process. And the person who's up, there's a lot of cultural procedure around who's asked to do that. But the person will have deeply thought about which karakia would be suitable for the meeting. So it's about tone, theme. It could be to recognise that there's going to be a very challenging conversation, or it could be about, therefore the karakia might be about peacefulness and respect, that sort of thing. It's becoming, and we're not going to say common, but an identified tonal benefit and really enjoyable part of the meeting, actually. And then if you open with a karakia, you also close with one. So just something to be aware of.
Let's just remind ourselves why we're here in the first place, and it's not because of the coffee. We're there to create a difference. Okay, Rebecca's made a good point there. Her experience as a director is that the chief executives take a key role, and often the chair does not get involved in the structuring of the agenda so much. And I will also add to that, and one of the main reasons that 90% of all boards say that their board meetings aren't as focused as they could be is because of the quality of the board papers that are being presented to them. So often if the CEO is drafting and doing all there is in the agenda, then there's no real questioning from the chair about, well, actually, are these the really strategic items? Are these the things that we need to be taking the time of the board with? It's a joint leadership role between the chief exec and the chair to come up with and actually craft the agenda. But the biggest issue that we face in board papers going up to the board meeting through the agenda is very seldom do they answer the so what question. So what do you want me to focus on with this particular paper? Why am I being asked to read this? I've got 160 pages in my board pack, and I'm still left with it. Well, so what do you want me to focus on? A good agenda addresses that.
Could I chime in there, Stephen?
Absolutely. Go for it.
You've actually, in the time we've been doing these webinars with us, you've done us a tremendous service of really, and though we've got good strategic mindset, just having those artifacts is so important. So the problem when you arrive at a board meeting is the remit can be so wide. Though most board members know they shouldn't be operational, there are operational matters or questions or concerns they need to touch on. So without any direction, it drifts to that level. But if you've got at the very beginning, as you're prompting us here today, a really strong, this is our purpose as an organisation, this is our vision, then you go down a layer, and we're implementing that idea you've been talking about in these webinars. Well, your strategic plan can be as simple as your top 3 or 4 things you must do in 2 to 3 years. So then you're further refining that, and you're very focused. And that gives a wonderful filter for every board meeting. Are we doing the top 3 or 4 things? If we're talking ad nauseum about something that's outside that, should we be talking about that? I think it's a really, if you don't have that overarching sort of strategic focus and direction, it is incredibly difficult for CEO and board to be able to stay focused, in my view.
Yeah, I think you summarised that brilliantly, Brett. And this is what this slide's about: is strategy always ahead of operational matters. Don't have your strategic plan as item number 54 because we've got so many other things to go through. So one of the key tools always is to look at structuring your agenda so that it follows notion of a consent agenda. Now, a consent agenda is one where you have 3 different styles of papers. Those papers that are for decision making, those papers that are for discussion, but we don't need to decide anything, and those papers that are for noting only, for information only. And the vast majority of them are for noting or for information. Now, all of those items that are for information only, for noting only, can be put in a block. And a block looks like a block at the end of the agenda, where all those items for noting are put in that one area. And at the start of the meeting, the block agenda is approved by the board. That means that you don't have to go through each of the items and approve each of the items. You're approving them in a block. It will cut out 25 to 30% of the time you spend on unnecessary stuff. So always those 3 types of papers: papers for decision, papers for discussion, papers for noting. Now, you'll find also that there are many, go back, Sean, a little bit, those papers that are for noting often will have in them something that is worthy of discussion. So it might be the financial reports, for example, your profit and loss, your balance sheet, maybe cash flow, and there might be something in there that is worthy of the board's attention. You pull that item out separately and either have it as an item for discussion separately, and it can be a cover page that can go on your finance and finance audit risk report, or it can have its own space in the agenda. If it's a point where we need to actually discuss something or potentially make a decision, it should be pulled out separately. Don't lose it in the 30 pages of the board subcommittee report.
Giselle, you have a question?
Yeah, just something that I'm really, really intrigued with this, because I think what Stephen's promoting, and it is promoting an idea, it's not necessarily common practice at all, is it puts the onus back on the rest of the board to say to the chair 48 hours beforehand, I don't agree that this is a four-noting paper. They have to say, I want it discussed. And that way you can really shape your agenda. So one thing that I'm really conscious of myself is that the agenda that I sign off as a chair, sometimes I get to the meeting and I don't want to run it quite that way. I want to change things. But there's kind of putting a time frame around that opportunity to change, to tweak, and to think, well, actually that paper just doesn't need discussing anymore, and to shift things. So yeah, it's not governance on the fly. I don't want to give that suggestion, but there's some room for a chair to open with a slightly different agenda than what was published.
I'm just going to chime in very quickly there. This is very interesting. There's been some good questions in the Q&A. It's really got me thinking whether we can use technology to just prompt the board members to be a little bit more proactive, because in 15 odd years serving boards, the default behaviour I see is the agenda is put together by either the CEO or the chair, or ideally in collaboration. And most board members are not proactively, saying, hey, actually, I think it should go in this direction, or we're spending too much time on, I had one very good director a few years ago who was constantly saying, hey, these things are not making the boat go faster, to borrow a yachting analogy. And it was a lovely prompt for times when the chair and I were just slipping into filling the agenda with things that were in front of us, instead of the things that, as you say, Stephen, created the future.
The key question for every director to ask and to keep in mind is that all directors, they should petition the chair. And by petitioning, I think there's a strategic issue in here. I think there's a bigger issue that's worthy of the board time. That's how you should start this off, not just, I want to talk about. So you've got to, as a director, come along with what you think the bigger issue is that is worthy of board time, which means that as directors, maybe we think a little bit more deeply about some of these items rather than just, I need to know a little bit more information in that area. Okay, let's move on. Now, one of the great things that we've found some boards have suggested is to colour code things. So items for noting can be one colour, items for discussion another colour, items for decision another colour. Always have the words in there, because some people are actually colour blind, but it means immediately that your eyes are drawn to those really big items, which are the items we have to decide. And then we know there's also those for discussion and those items for noting. And I know that a number of directors have asked about, colour coding when it comes to board portals and those sorts of things. And I know that, BoardPro is looking into that. All right, thoughts. What issues do we have that has raised so far? Brett?
Oh, gosh, there's a few there. We've traversed those. So, have you got anything tip of tongue, Giselle, while I'm collecting my thoughts?
Yeah, I think it's emphasising that a good meeting is not a coincidence. The chair has worked really hard, and the directors have contributed to making the agenda fit for purpose. I really, really like this idea of setting the purpose up front. And I actually wrote down, there's 3 parts, I think. The purpose of the organisation. We've touched on that. We've touched on the board's purpose. We're not meeting just to meet, we're meeting to create the future. And then the meeting purpose, I would kind of like to talk about that maybe. What do we really want to achieve in this meeting that is going to make a difference and add value? So I've written that down as a bit of a theme for me.
That leads us nicely onto the next part, which is, a board agenda is made up of a whole lot of board reports and board discussion papers, but most of them don't hit the mark. I would like to see, as a director, in fact, I insist on this if I'm sitting on a board, I want to see for every report that comes to me that has some sort of discussion or decision, I want to know what are the strategic implications that you want me as a director to focus on. Don't make me read through 30 pages of background. What are these strategic implications that is worthy of my time as a director, that I can bring my insights and my life experiences and my diversity to the conversation? What are these strategic implications? So a very simple thing to do is to look at all those papers going to the board that have a paper that is for decision or discussion, to have a heading at the bottom of it or at the start of it, it doesn't matter, that says strategic implications for board discussion. And if there aren't any, then why are we bringing it to the board for them to discuss?
I'm going to chime in there.
It really helps you focus.
That's such a useful point, Stephen. I've found, can you go back one slide, Sean? I've always found that when as a CEO working with the chair, it's a little bit hard to read on the slide there, but every, and this doesn't have to be an electronic software, but in BoardPro, you have the ability to type up the purpose of the agenda item. And I think that's such a valuable way, linking up with your thinking, Stephen, to go, well, why am I doing this? What outcome do I want out of this? Sometimes I just put in there 2 or 3 big questions that I want to ask of the board. So if the prep, I think board meetings are so front-end loaded. So if you do really good prep, you're really, on point with why you're doing it and strategic, you'll almost inevitably get good outcomes. And if you don't, the risk is much higher that, board meetings can be very chaotic. Sometimes they can achieve good outcomes and sometimes they just fail.
Yeah. So anyway, strategic implications for board discussion, or Brett's suggestion, strategic questions for board consideration. They're 2 great headings, which means that the authors of the report have to have thought about this. Don't give me a finance, audit and risk report from the board subcommittee. Do give me a report that has, here are the 2 strategic implications that we want the board to focus on. All right, next one, Sean. Now, be careful of using of ratios too. I love the use of ratios. They can be really handy, but what I'm looking for in ratios is I want to know, what is the ratio? What's not acceptable? What at the lower end, what's not acceptable? At the higher end, what's not acceptable? So for example, with your P&L and your balance sheet, the key ratio there is liquidity. There's no good telling me that we've got a liquidity ratio of 1.3. I want to know at what level is it not acceptable at the low end, and what level at the high end is it not acceptable. So give me the range. But then I can see as a director, if we're within that range, I'm pretty comfortable as long as those ranges are checked every year. Giselle.
I had a really great example of this recently, which I thought was fantastic. So yes, it was a ratio dashboard. So there were some KPIs being reported on, but the way it was reported was in like a dashboard with a graph every time, 0 to 100. And what it had on it every time was, what's the budget or the KPI? What's our target? What does underperformance look like, and what does excessive outstanding performance look like? So there were about 6 of these graphs. It was so clear. It was fantastic.
I see a lot of dashboard reports and use of ratios, and they're really pretty, but I'm still left as a director with, well, so what do you want me to focus on? I see it looks nice, and that's what we've got to get right with our board reporting, is to answer the so what question. What are the implications? What are the questions we need to ask? Brett?
And actually, by putting some sort of qualitative judgment alongside your ratio, your KPIs, small number of them, you actually are indicating to the whole board as a CEO responsible for producing their report, what is strategic. So then your flow on would be, if it's red or orange, your traffic light system, or your underperformance, you go on and you explain that, which gives the board member the prompt to go, okay, that's strategic, it's on the dashboard, it's indicated orange and red. Am I happy with the explanation? It invites them to talk or not talk. So that ties in nicely with doing having a very strong CEO report as part of your strategic arsenal.
And don't forget that board members can't remember everything between meetings, especially if you don't meet every month. So that commentary that nudges the board with the key information they've had before, super important.
Okay, let's move on. So the manage of board-owned risks. One of the things, we see risk management reports, they'll come through either every board meeting or once every 6 months or whatever it might be. And again, most board risk reports miss the point. Everything has risks, so if something's coming up to the board for discussion, we need to do a risk analysis of that. But what I want to know is, what are the big fella risks? What are the ones where the board really needs to own them? So if you're going to do a risk report, don't give them the whole 743 identified risks in the ever unfolding A3 risk register. The top 3 or 4 key risks, those risks that provide us with the greatest possibilities, the greatest opportunities, if we get them right. If we get them wrong, it'll be the most dire consequences, but we can actually create opportunity from those as well too. So there's a whole thing there about re-looking at how we present things to the board. Let's move on to the next one. Using dashboards sparingly, we've covered. Let's move on to the next one.
I have a few questions here, Steve, which I might interject with at the moment.
Fire away.
A question from Jan Ballantyne. Several board members often take up time on what I consider really nitpicking queries of financial details that should be sorted out before the meeting. What is the best way to seek change to this?
The best way is to get the chair to lead it and to say to these people, let's try this new way of running our meetings. If you don't like it, we can always change back in 12 months' time. And of course you don't if it works, because if it works, it works. The other thing is to actually put your foot down a little bit here. Okay, these questions you're asking now should have been asked last Tuesday when we had that option in there. I'll briefly answer them this time, but I don't expect it to happen at the next board meeting. You've just got to be a bit tough on some people, because some people will take up a lot of airspace that is not required, and it takes away from the gift that board could be.
We have a question from Jeff. Should time limits be included as a guide for each section in the agenda, i.e. the decision, discussion, noting, or leave it open-ended?
Some boards put time limits in and they work it really well. Some boards put time limits in and they've got no idea what they're doing. Yeah. I think my idea of time limits is, personally, I don't put them in. It might give me a bit of an idea, but I know some boards find it really useful. Giselle?
So if I'm chairing, I absolutely do it. I don't necessarily need to make it visible to the rest of the board, but I have to.
Yes.
I need to know when I'm on and off track. And yeah, otherwise you're going to run out of time, and that is just not good. So,
actually, I think that's a really good point. Having your own cheat sheet essentially as chair to make sure that you're keeping touch with things. I agree with that.
Yeah.
Okay, so one of the other things here in terms of structuring your agenda, look at leading indicators, not lagging indicators. Tell me what might be into the future. Don't just tell me what has been in the past. Financial reports are the worst proponents of this. We should always be looking at what are the implications of these figures, not what has happened in the past so much. So I want to know that from all of our reports. Look at what gives us indicators of the future, not just what has been. Yeah, looking at measuring the right things. A great question that a director should ask when board reports are coming up is this telling us the information that we need to know to make the choices that we need to make? Is this actually getting at the outcomes that we're after? And we just need to be vigilant on that. Next one. This is an interesting one. We're finding more and more now boards are asking their CFOs, Chief Financial Officer, and CEO to also have a declaration together with the financial reports that the organisation is solvent and that all key payments have been updated. The superannuation and the BAS and all those sorts of things. So a declaration. I know you had some thoughts on this, Giselle.
Yeah, look, I absolutely love this, but I would like to see this at the beginning of the meeting, because otherwise, if you haven't got it, sometimes you can spend a whole lot of time on things that actually don't matter if you're not actually in the right place solvency wise. And this comes up more often than we are aware of. You don't see a lot of the behind the scenes stuff published. So I think this is a really, really smart idea.
Okay.
We do that. That works really well in the startup environment, Giselle. As we've said many times on these webinars, the nature of our game is to raise money, spend that money to achieve milestones, and then go and raise more money. So, of course, solvency is an ongoing management or runway as an ongoing management process. So we make that front and center in our dashboard and colour it in orange when we're running out of money.
Sean, next one. Okay, and one of the last things I'll leave us with here, and then we'll get on to an example agenda. This is we're about to get into the really fun stuff, which is an example agenda. But one of the things we should also ask is, what should be on our agenda for next year? You know, yes, we'll have the typical things that we're doing, papers for reporting, papers for discussion, decision, noting, those sorts of things. But what haven't we had on our agenda before? And what many boards have found this year is the whole notion of culture is now finding its way onto a board agenda. And in fact, pardon me, many boards that I've come across, they're starting to have culture as one of their standard items, which might be a paper for discussion or a paper for noting, whereas 2 years ago, it never appeared on the agenda at all. And there's all sorts of reasons. We've got a webinar coming up in a week's time about the board's role in culture, which will explore that in more depth. But what should be on your agenda next year that we haven't considered? Just some little hints. You know, DEI, diversity, equity, and inclusion. Oh, everyone's talking about that. Yeah, well, they're talking about it for a reason. So maybe we should start looking at that. So what is on your agenda for next year? All right, Sean, can we go to some of these sample agendas? All right.
I'll just share my screen for a minute here. So
I can see it.
Marvelous.
Okay, so we don't expect you to read these, but really just want to go through and show you some indicators of what we can do. If you can scroll down. So we've got, for example, you scrolling down, Sean?
Hang on a minute. I'll just share my screen again because that didn't work.
He's only got a small portion, Stephen, so he needs to share the other screen.
The full one. Yeah.
Can you not see that?
Not yet. We're still on the slideshow, Sean.
Okay, let me see if I can do something else.
So let's, as he's doing that, let's talk about the first element of an agenda. So put your vision statement up there, obviously time, date, location, and then present, apologies. Now here's an interesting one. Apologies, our view is that a board and the chair should never accept any director's apologies unless they have been in contact with the chair or the CEO to say, I have read the board papers and I have no questions. Or I have read the board papers and here are the 2 items I would like addressed. Mm-hmm. Not reading the board papers is not acceptable. And to my mind, I would not provide that director with, yes, we accept your apology. So duty of care says you've got to be informed, diligent, read the board papers. You know, duty of care as a director. Duty of care means that you can't just not turn up to a board meeting. You've got to be involved. So, as a thought, apologies takes on a new meaning. Apologies after you have shown evidence that you've read the board papers and that you have either no questions or here are the questions that you would like addressed.
I'll just jump in here, Steve. We've got a problem with technology here, so we won't be able to take you through the whole template, which is a bit of a shame because this is a fabulous document. Okay, so essentially what the template will do, and you'll all get copies of this, is it'll take you through looking at, well, there's some declarations, item number 3, here are the declarations that we can, confirmation of the minutes, but don't note that the ones that are for noting that are in green will appear in a block right at the very end of the agenda. So here we've got strategic matters. So if you think about the thinking, here are the strategic matters that are for discussion and for decision. Here are the board operations. Many of them are for noting. Then we've got professional board development, and you can read the items in there. You know, every
2 or 3 times a year, you'd be bringing in an external stakeholder to talk to your board about their top 2 strategic issues, what they think the implications for your organisation might be. You can do the same thing with staff. One of the great sections, stop there. One of the great sections is this one towards the end, which is my favourite term for this is strategic gossip. Okay, so what have you heard out there? What have you come across that you think is of such importance to the board that we need to consider that in our next agenda? What is some of the things that are going on out there? You'll notice item number 11, standing reports, operational reports. They're all matters for noting. Then your board in camera session. Some boards do, sometimes they're called executive sessions. Sometimes they're called board only sessions. In camera session is the legal term for them. It doesn't matter what you call them. But in essence, this is board only time where they talk about either key issues that they don't want the staff involved, performance management of the staff or the senior executive, or in fact, our own performance as a board. And typically, 50% run it at the start of a meeting, 50% run it at the end of a meeting. My personal view is I like them at the end of a meeting. Giselle has a really good example of what she does with it. Your thoughts, Giselle?
Yeah, so just on one particular board, we run the board only time sort of in the middle of the meeting so that we don't lose it at the end if everybody's having to travel or rush away or you've run out of time. But also it's not at the start where everyone's a little bit cold, we're not quite warmed up, we've got some other things we want to get on with. So I quite like that. I just wanted to chip in here. I know, conscious of time, Sean, but I want to emphasize to everybody on the call that this document is fantastic. It's got so many good ideas in it, and I would really encourage you to grab it, print it, have a really good read and think about which of the techniques and processes you might adopt. I've already grabbed one of them and I've got more to go. So yeah, it's really good.
Every board will structure their agenda differently, but the thinking should be similar. Now, one thing we've done too is that has been translated into the BoardPro agenda. Sean, did you want to talk a little bit about that?
Yeah, we're out of time, but I'll just quickly talk about it. So with that document that Stephen's prepared, we have actually built the entire strategic board agenda into BoardPro. So that's available to anyone that signs up for a trial over the next 24 hours. So there's no credit cards involved. You can just sign up and get full access to BoardPro as a product, which is a fantastic product for board management. And there'll also be a pre-built agenda template in there for you. So I strongly encourage you to sign up for a trial.
So if we can just finish this off now. Sorry, Giselle, go on.
I was going to say, just what about for the people who are already subscribers?
Anyone that would like a copy of the strategic board agenda template can request one through chat, and that will be added into their account.
Cool. So just to summarize everything so far, the board agenda is the single most powerful tool you've got to help shape your directors' ways of looking at the world, the way they're discussing. The key thing in all of this is to try it, change it, but just be aware of what is possible. And then you can start to change your agenda to actually make it fit for purpose for us to actually be able to create the future. Thank you. Sean, yours.
Fabulous. Yeah, thanks for that. So look, everybody, we're almost at the end of our session. Please feel free to connect with our presenters on LinkedIn. Their handles are here on screen that you can see. Now, we have a schedule of webinars over the next few months, which you can learn all about these topics on our website. Our next webinar, titled Not-for-Profit Governance, What You Need to Know, will be a really interesting one. So please take a moment to consider an investment in your time for that particular webinar. And I look forward to hosting you back at those events. Now, you'll receive an email from us very shortly, which will include a video of today's webinar, the presentation slides and the topic white paper from Stephen Bowman, and of course, a copy of Stephen's strategic board agenda template. As I mentioned in the opening, we do have a special bonus for you, which I talked about a little bit before. So, which is if you sign up for our trial, over the next 24 hours, you'll receive a copy of Stephen's strategic agenda template built into your BoardPro account at no charge whatsoever. Now, as you leave the webinar today, don't forget to complete our 1-minute survey and go into the draw to win our fantastic hamper worth over $400. We'll announce the winner shortly after the webinar today. So Thanks for your attendance, everybody. I hope you enjoyed the session today. Thanks, Stephen, Giselle, and Brett. Look forward to seeing you all at our next webinar.
Bye, everyone. Thanks, Giselle. Thanks, Brett.
Stephen.
Thanks, Sean. Bye.